Looks like James, we're going to get you to read verses 5 and 6. Mark will run up and finish out 7, 8, and 9 for us. But first, we're in Ephesians chapter 6, verses 5 beginning. And James, what do you have?
I need a moment.
All right.
Apologize here.
It's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Bondservants, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, and sincerity of heart as to Christ, not with eye service as man pleasers, but as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, with goodwill doing service as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatever good anyone does, he will receive the same from the Lord, whether he is a slave or free.
And one more.
And you masters do the same things to them, giving up threatening, knowing that your own master also is in heaven, and there is no partiality with him.
All right. The next section, pretty popular section, 10 through 19, talking about putting on the whole armor of God. Last week, we were talking about parents' responsibility. Children, obey your parents. The fathers, don't provoke your children to wrath. And now he talks about in verse 5, bondservants, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling and sincerity of heart as to Christ. He's talking about the kind of service. Now, this has been kind of a touchy subject over the years, because when Jesus was inspiring these people to write through the Holy Spirit, what kind of situation was going on then that has existed in other places and even in this country? What was he dealing with? Slavery, okay? And so, was Jesus for or against it? Neither. It was just I don't want to say the economics of the time. It's the, what's the word? It's what?
It's just what happened. It's what people did. Whoever was the conqueror, they took the conquered and made him into slaves.
Right. And of course, you read about that through the Old Testament, right? You talk about the times of Daniel, okay, and how loyal he was. You know, they were taken into captivity, Israel and Judah, because of their rebellion and against God. And of course, when we're talking about this time period, you know, who's the world power during this time? Okay, Rome. Okay, and during this time period, you had slaves, correct? Okay, and so what was Jesus' goal for his followers? Was his goal to overthrow Rome? No. That's what he wasn't training his people to do that. Well, Rome was very corrupt, wasn't it? Yeah, it was very corrupt. Did Christ approve of the corruptness? No, not at all. And then we talked about the slavery that existed back then. Of course, this shouldn't be new to us, because if we ever read the book of Philemon, does everybody know what the book of Philemon is about? What's the book of Philemon about?
A slave that ran away from his master and he was told to go back.
Exactly. When he was converted, the slave runs away and he goes to Rome. Well, what do you know? Rome. He goes to Rome, and of all people he runs into Paul. And he's converted. And of all things, Paul knows Philemon. So Onesimus is sent back, right? And so it was just crazy. But anyways, when he went back, his master had responsibilities and the slave had responsibilities. And because of the way the political system was at that time, not for or against, but as more and more people became Christians, perhaps the political system could change. You know, that's what you would hope, that people would become more godly, become more moral, and of course, eventually Rome was overthrown. Mark?
I was going to say, I'm not well versed in all the dynamics of Rome and all the things that went on, but a lot of times, I know in later times, people would digit themselves because it was an economic thing. In order to survive, they could be an indentured servant to an individual, and they would serve that individual, and in return, they could get the things they needed to live.
Exactly right.
I don't know how much of that is, is part of that, what you're describing at this particular time, that it could have been a possibility.
Exactly, and that's true. And so I want us to understand that when we're reading these verses 5 through 9, he's basically telling us, I don't care what your situation is. He's coming at this from a Christian standpoint, right? Because he's telling masters or your boss, or you being the slave, or you being the servant, you being the employee, whatever the situation is, do your job, right? Be faithful. I mean, that's really what he's wanting. And of course, and that's what that book of Philemon was all about, because, when you had a slave run away, why was he running away? Well, you could say, well, just because it's slavery, but probably also the way you treat them, in which he's talking about in this particular text. Please look at bond servants, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh. Well, even when we're talking in the political system, I mean, do you like everything that the government approves of? Do you support it all? Are you supposed to be loyal to the government? Absolutely, without a doubt. Because you know what? I want to ask you something. Whether you're in a corrupt political system, let's say you live in a communistic society. If you lived in a communistic country, can you be a Christian? If you are a slave, can you be a Christian? Yes. No, of course, the flip side to that, go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say, one of the things that always, I never quite can figure out, a lot of times governments become hostile toward religion. And especially the religion, the New Testament, if they would read it, they would want their country filled with Christians. Because Christians, whatever governmental system that they're in, they're going to, they're not going to be trying to overthrow it. They're going to be just trying to live in peace and worship God is the way that we're supposed to do it. And why they want to try to drive those people away, I just never understood.
Well, and see, that's the interesting thing, Mark, you bring that up, because you used the term Christian. You didn't use the word religious people. Because people who are religious can get caught up in the political, which happened, right? You had the political and the religious mixed together. And so you really did, so that's what you had with the Catholic Church, right? You had that political pole that was in there. But yeah, those who are true Christians, and that's what Pilate understood about Jesus. Pilate understood, you know what? He's not a threat to Rome. Nancy?
Well, a lot of governments too, they look at themselves as being the high. They're the ones, and they don't want anything else to be above them.
Right.
And so if you have God above them, then they don't like it.
That's it. But back to Mark's point, when he talks about how that Christians will be obedient. Now in verse 5, is there an option here? Is it like, be obedient if you want to? What if your boss is really your boss just really works you really hard, so you don't have to be obedient to your boss, do you?
Yeah.
Yeah, you do. You see, he's not giving you an option here. Bondservants, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, okay? With fear and trembling and sincerity of heart as to Christ. And so the whole point is, you are laboring for those who are over you, just like what?
Christ.
Like Christ. Like he's your boss. Like you're working for him. Would you slander Christ behind his back? Now, this is a real eye-opener. Here's a real challenge, right, for all of us. When we think, I know that I did that sermon. I tell you what, this last month has been it's been an interesting month for me, preaching on complaining and preaching on anger. Because Debbie and I are constantly talking about it. We're constantly saying, was that complaining? And during this week, it was just a real test. Now, I'm not getting angry. I'm just expressing that this is really disappointing right now. I'm just trying to stay calm. But you know what? It's making us think. And that's what we're supposed to do as Christians. When we get to the point where we just don't give it a second thought, you know what? I'll be good to my boss, but I'm going to tell you, the moment he takes advantage of me, he's not getting the best of me. I am not giving him 100%. I am not working for him like I'm working for the Lord. I will only do that if the conditions are good. Where's that in here? Where's that? Is it there? It's not. He's saying, bondservants, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh. Because we realize that we are doing this as if we're doing it for the Lord. And of course, the key to all of this is verse 6, and you guys know what this means. What does it mean, not with eye service? What does that mean?
Don't do anything.
Not when they're watching. Not just when they're watching, right? You picture that many times, you know, here comes the boss. He's gone. Okay. All right. And, you know, and I've seen people, not seen, I have heard brethren tell me over the years that they've had fellow workers despise them because they work when the boss is not looking. Why does that bother them?
Because it's their conscience. They know that what they're doing is wrong. They're making them look bad.
They're making them look bad. And I'm going to tell you guys, Christians, you can be doing the right thing and people will hate you for that. I want you to be mindful of the fact that you're here to please God and you're not here to be a man pleaser. But I'm telling you, these are things that happen every day in your life. Nancy?
Well, somebody said something about, you know, making them look bad, but it's really, you only do that yourself. Nobody can make you look bad.
Well, but she's talking about comparing. You're comparing because, in other words, if you find somebody who's a good worker and you've got somebody who's a slacker, right? You're going to make that person look bad. Not that you're going out of your way to make it look bad. That's not why I'm going to work so hard and I'm going to make that guy look bad. No, that's not what we're talking about. You just go in about doing your job, he says here, not with eye service as men pleasers. And I think that's what people do. Is there a lot of politicking going on in the workforce? Okay. Well, Denise, well, explain what you said yes to. What is politicking in the workforce? What is that?
Well, it's trying to outdo somebody else and trying to get something. A lot of times, the politicking is getting something for nothing. And
Okay.
it's who you know as to how you're going to get to where you're at.
That's right.
And how you can speak to somebody. A lot of times, it's not by your worth ethic sometimes. Sometimes it's who you know where you're going to go.
Well, you know, and it's kind of like, where are you going with that? Where are you going with that file? Well, the boss wanted it right away. Here, I'll take care of it. Here you go, boss. Yeah, I found it for you. I got it for you. You know, and he takes all the credit. You know, and he's going to get promoted. He's taking advantage of other people doing what he should be doing, right? You're doing the work of other people, and they're getting the promotion. Does that stuff really go on? It goes on. We know that. But he's saying here, you don't be like that. But you're saying, well, Chuck, if I'm not like that, they're going to get ahead of me.
Not in the end.
That's it. You're not here to be a man pleaser. You're here to please the Lord. That's the difference. Being a true Christian, and I like Mark's point because we're going to keep coming back throughout our study today, is his comment would be, if people really understood, the best people, I did a sermon years ago called The Most Fortunate People in the World, and that is the one who has a mate that's a Christian, the one who has a friend that's a Christian, the one that has an employee as a Christian, the one who has the country that has a citizen as a Christian. Because if you're a true Christian, don't you help others? I mean, you're fortunate if your mate's a Christian. You're fortunate if your friend is a faithful Christian. You're fortunate if you have employees who are faithful Christians. Unfortunately, sometimes, and it happens, is that when you hire Christians, if you're a Christian, you hire Christians, what happens sometimes with that? What could happen?
The employee take advantage of the employer.
Exactly. We're all Christians here, and so I can come in late, and I can get away with stuff. Well, that's not what we're talking. We're not talking about that kind of a Christian. We're talking about a faithful Christian. Man, you'd love to hire a bunch of Christians, but the problem comes is you hire Christians and they expect things without doing anything for it. Remember that sermon, the attitude of entitlement. I'm entitled to this just because we're Christians.
Well, then I doubt that they're true Christians.
Well, that's my point. Well, they can't, but they're just not faithful, right?
Right.
And that's the point that we're trying to get across here. This passage is telling us how to be faithful Christians, folks. You say, well, no, this is talking about how to be a good employee. No, he's telling you how to be a faithful Christian. Faithful Christians do this. What are you going to say, Mike?
Well, I was just gonna say, it's true in spiritual realm as it is in the economic realm. You know, people who are involved in, whether it's an open congregation or your place of employment, there are rules that have to be followed, and people have to be willing to do things in order for anything to succeed and continue to, to survive.
Right.
And that's just the way it is. If a person goes into anything looking for a way to, get what they want for absolutely nothing, it all fails.
Right. It's
If that's the prevailing thought among people, then businesses will fail, and so will a local congregation.
Now, we have this dilemma, right? We've got this dilemma, whether it's in God's family like you're talking about or in the workforce. How many people out there want to work less but make more? Really? Is that true? People want to work less but make more?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Now, how many people out there want to work more and get less money for it? But which one do you find yourself falling into as a Christian? People taking advantage of it. It seems like, I'm working more and more and more, and I'm just not getting more for what I'm doing. Okay? So when you start looking at, well, this is the way it's supposed to be, look, you're going to get yourself, as a Christian now, I'm talking about as God's servants, you're going to get yourself in a lot of trouble here. Now, again, if you have a job that you're working more and you're getting less for, what are your options? Quit your job. You don't like it, quit. Okay, nobody's forcing you to, well, then just do your job. And see, now again, I'm not getting into all the, you guys could throw a bunch of scenarios, but Chuck, let me explain, let me tell you this is what happens to me at work. Look, here's what I'm saying. Here's what the Lord says. Don't do it with eye service as man pleasers, but as bond servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. Now, it might not always be the case, and I know there are exceptions to everything, but by and large, do most people who are bosses, do they appreciate hard workers? I mean, do they appreciate it? Are they aware of it? For the most part, a hard worker. I know there are exceptions to that, but I'm going to tell you, growing up and having jobs, and you can attest to that, where people have appreciated or at least acknowledged the fact that you've been a hard worker. Now, whether you get it from a fleshly standpoint, the Lord just wants us to be faithful workers, okay? Be loyal, obey from the heart. How much work are you going to do? Well, you're not going to do much here because you want to do less. The attitude's already wrong. How hard are you going to work on this job? How hard will you work on this job?
As hard as you're able to.
Okay. How hard do most people work on this type of job
Just
work?
enough to get by.
Just in other words, they're pushing me, and I'm not getting more. In some ways, I'm getting less. Maybe I should just say the same. But they're working me more and more and more, and I'm just not getting ahead. A situation like this might cause us to work less. That's the temptation. The temptation is to be like this, but I know in our minds we're saying, look, I'll work more if I just make more. I'm good with this. I'm good with this scenario. Connect those two up, then we've got a deal, boss. Want to work me more? Just pay me more. But don't work me more and pay me less or the same. You're taking advantage of me. Remember, you have the option, you can leave. But you and I as Christians have a different outlook. I'm coming back to Mark's statement again. If there was a boss here, if there's somebody just starting up a new company and he just heard this sermon, what do you think he's thinking right now? He's not a Christian, but he's sitting in this class and he's starting a new company and he just heard this lesson, these verses here. What should he be thinking? I need to hire some of those people. I want those people to come and work for me. I would. I'm like, You mean to tell me that these people are going to be devoted just like they're working for Christ? Like when I walk out of the room, they're still going to be working? They're going to put their heart into it? Yeah, that's what they're going to be. Where are those people? I want to hire those people. And here's the $1 million question. Is that you? Is that you? Would he hire you to do that job? And I hope that we fit this description here as he's talking about the kind of people that you and I need to be. Look at verse 7. With goodwill doing service as to the Lord and not to man. Again, repeating our point. Knowing that whatever good anyone does, he will receive the same from the Lord, whether he is a slave or whether he is free. You think about the advantage. Well, you've got an advantage. Look, when it comes to God's family, you know, what advantage does a master have over his slave? Tell me this. What advantage does a master have over his slave in the spiritual realm?
None.
Zero. Zero advantage. The slave is supposed to be obedient. What's the master supposed to do? He's supposed to be obedient, right? Now you might, we get into this long debate of, well, really what he should do is just give him his freedom then, okay? But that wasn't the political system at that time. And again, I'm not, we're not sitting here going, well, is it right for that to happen? I'm just saying that if it ever happens again, if I'm ever in that situation, this passage applies to me. I am supposed to be obedient, and in the spiritual realm, in the end, there's no difference, is the point. Mark?
I was going to say, go back to that book, Philemon. Paul sets perfectly that relationship, how it should function.
Right.
And I remember how he told, I always get confused. Onesimus, he was the runaway slave.
Right.
Well, Philemon, he told Philemon, to take him back, and if there's anything, and I'm paraphrasing, if there's any addition, if there's any money that's owed or anything like that, I'll make good for it. But just remember, I'm the one that taught you the gospel as well. So,
it's a great sermon. If you guys wants to preach that sermon next Sunday morning, go ahead. But yeah, it's powerful because again, it doesn't excuse the responsibility of Philemon, does it? In any of that, it didn't excuse his responsibilities. Okay, and I know that we have a difficult time, especially if we get back to the boss and the employee and the employer relationship. I think there's just that part of us, that fleshly side that he dealt with earlier on in this reading here. Where was the flesh? He mentioned it. I know it was in here. There it is. It was verse 5. It was verse 5. Who are masters according to the flesh. He's making that analogy there that we have these physical jobs in this world, but we have a spiritual connection, our spiritual relationship with the Lord, and he expects us to live in such a way because ultimately our goal is to go to heaven. We're in deep trouble when our ultimate goal is to make it all the big dollars. And that's good. It's nothing wrong to have money. We've talked about this in the past, but if you lose sight of this, we're going to get ourselves in trouble. Mallory.
I think the thing to remember is that, yes, there were slaves and masters on earth, but we're all slaves to Christ.
Sure.
So we all have a master. So if you remember, hey, we are all in this slave mentality. Like, how do we serve Christ? That's how you're supposed to also serve your employers. You're supposed to love and, give it your all, right, and not just do the physical side. Like, you can do the word, but it talks about with a sincere heart. Do you really mean the work? Are you really putting forth it? Or are you just doing the physical outside part, but your heart's not in it? Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing. Christ doesn't want you just to show up.
Yeah.
He wants you to be present.
And that's the whole point. Again, getting back to that, I think it was the previous question about if your heart is not in it, how does that affect your work? Right? Or does it affect your work? And that's what we're saying. Somebody can say, well, I'm doing my job. Just get off my back. I'm doing my job. Yeah, but if your heart's not in it, it's affecting those that are around you. It's affecting possibly your output. Okay, there's just a lot of things that relate to that. And now getting back to what Mallory was mentioning a moment ago, yeah, slaves to Christ. But he uses that term a lot. Has anybody here ever been a slave? I'm going to tell you, every one of you have. You've been a slave to sin. The Bible described it. You've been a slave to sin, a servant of sin, as he talked about in Romans chapter 6. And so you were obedient. You said, well, I don't want to be that anymore. That whole concept bothers me. Okay, great. Well, now you're a slave to Christ. Well, that's not good. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Why? Because of the relationship that is there. Because this particular relationship here, he's promising you heaven. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. You talk about your reward, Mark.
Well, it's a lot more than just heaven. We become adopted children of God.
There's a lot of benefits that are there. That constant communication with, well, actually, all the spiritual blessings that are found in Jesus. We get to enjoy every one of them. You know, that's one of the great privileges. You know, you talk about, sometimes people will coax you into a job by talking about the perks, right? The perks. Well, what are the perks? Well, we'll give you a signing bonus, and we'll move you, and you'll get 3 weeks vacation. We'll give you a bonus every 3 months. You'll get a cost of living increase. You know, he does all this stuff, and you're like, when can I sign up? You know, if all those perks are there, you're like, wow, I want this job. But then he goes, well, there's a clause here. We expect you to come to work on time. We expect you to be happy, put your heart into it. We don't want you to be gossiping around work, you know, about other workers. Hey, I'm good for it, because when we focused on all these perks, are you kidding me? Who doesn't want to serve Jesus with all their heart, soul, mind? Look at the perks. That's what Mark's talking about. All those spiritual blessings that we have there. And so that's why he's saying, bring that over into the physical realm. You got the spiritual realm there and all that we enjoy, but remember, we are serving for the Lord, whether bond or free. Look at verse 9. And you, masters, do what? The same thing. That's interesting. If you're a boss, well, you know, I know in some companies, a friend of mine was telling me that they're not allowed to associate with the associates. You know, he was a district manager. He could have some of the managers into his home, but you're not going to have any of the associates in the home, and got to keep that distance that's there, you know. But I'm going to tell you, when it comes to the relationship within Christ, obviously that's broken down. You masters do the same things to them, giving up threatening, knowing that your own master also is in heaven, and there's no partiality. Come on, guys. What's verse 9 talking about here? It's powerful. What's he talking about? Come on, you masters, don't what?
Master over. We're all equal. I mean, you're not any better than.
But what's the temptation? What did he say don't do?
Take advantage of yourself.
How? Threatening, Warren.
Well, it's difficult. I've lived it.
Yeah.
So you have a group of people that are always ready to do the work. You can call on them. You know, they're not the super smart, but they're always willing to do the job. And then you've got some that they're just not going to do it. You cannot force them. They're just taking up space.
Right.
So it's hard. I'm not saying I did that.
Right.
But you, as a person who's in that situation, you have to be able to try to treat everybody fairly, but still get the job done. It's recognizing that you have a core of people that's going to do the work that you need to have done. Because most times the timelines are compressed. You can't put it off to tomorrow.
Right.
You have to do it now.
Right.
And you know that this group over here, or whatever you've got, you have to work with, but you got to treat them fair. And that's the rub. It's hard to do. Some of that's perceived as favoritism.
Right.
And whether you come to that decision on your own is your own conscience. But personally, I try to do what was right. And I think that's the best a person can do is in that situation. You don't go reward directly these little who are doing the right things for the time. And you try to treat them fairly.
You know, you hit on an interesting point there, because it happens in our spiritual realm. What affects our service is when we spend time looking at other people. at what other people are not doing per se. I mean, that can happen. I've been fallen victim to that. When you think about what others are not doing, that can have a direct bearing on your output. Like Warren says, you can have a bunch of people who you can count on and those people you can't count on. That's kind of sad that exists. Here I am talking about, well, you need to be the kind of person that people can count on. But what makes it hard is that you're amongst all those people who are not, all right? They're not. That makes it very difficult, and that's challenging. And I agree. I don't say I have the answers for that, but I have the answer for how you are supposed to cope. Do the work. Trey?
And that's where you fall into doing more for less, because you're having to pick up what everybody else isn't doing.
That's exactly right. And you could quit, right? You have that privilege. You can quit that job if you want. But yeah, if somebody's not doing theirs, you're picking up. But here's the real clincher in the spiritual realm. Can a brother or sister here do your job? No. If they're picking up the slack, what are they doing? They're doing what's expected of them. You can't do over and beyond your call and duty as a Christian. There's no super Christians here. You cannot be a super Christian. Do you understand that? Because there's equality within the body of Christ. You're not a super Christian. Now, if you're not doing your job, you're not a faithful Christian. If somebody's doing a job, sometimes Christians, if we're bringing this parallel in, sometimes Christians don't hang around certain Christians because certain Christians make them look bad. Is that possible? Am I just dreaming this up? If you have it in the workforce, well, man, you're making me look bad. I don't want to be around you. Can that happen in the spiritual realm? You got this look of, well, I don't know if I want to go there. Well, yeah. People's godliness. I mean, if you're around somebody, if you're around Christians, and as soon as somebody goes, can you believe that? Doesn't the Bible say something about criticizing government? Bringing that up. Or, hey, are you gossiping about them? Or what if you're around some Christians and somebody says, really, is that so? What are you doing? Oh, I'm calling that guy to see if what you're saying about it is true. What? Stop! I just heard hearsay. Well, what are you spreading it for? Could you imagine how uncomfortable you're going to make people feel when you start acting, and when Christians don't want to act like Christians? It's the same thing, folks. And what I'm saying is God just wants us to always be Christians. And the temptation, Warren, tell me if I'm wrong, but the temptation is if you've got all these workers mixed in with these people that don't want to work, what's the temptation? No. It's to join them. If you can't beat them, join them. You're not doing your job, I'm not doing my job. Boss gets mad, he's going to have to fire us all then. I'm just going to do that. And that's the danger. And we need to be careful. You had your hand up a moment ago, Trey.
Oh, I was going to say, it's not that it makes other Christians feel bad. It makes them feel guilty.
Okay. Well, somebody said that earlier about workers too. You're making me feel guilty that I'm not doing what I should be doing. And to me, this is everyday stuff that we're facing. And what I'm learning from all of this today is kind of like John 21, where Peter turned to Jesus and said, well, what about this disciple? Remember, Jesus said, don't worry about him. If I will that he never dies, you just follow me. And then the rumor went out that disciple would never die. And Jesus said, I didn't say he wouldn't die. I said, if he never dies, what's that to you? You just follow me. We sometimes spend more time looking at the output of others and comparing ourselves. Matt.
I was wondering, when I worked at my job before I became mom, I struggled with the fact that I often didn't want to do what other people were slacking on, and I just focused on my part and got my stuff done, because I did do the whole, I have to pick it up and help the whole office thing. But then I look at it and I said, these verses don't necessarily say you need to do everything, because a lot of times there are a lot of slaves, and yeah, you could go and do their job too, but it doesn't say that. You do your job.
You just do what you can.
So when I started just doing my part and stopped trying to do everyone else's too, that's when it started becoming that the bosses started to see, oh, she really does do a lot because a lot of the other stuff wasn't getting done. But it wasn't my job to do the other people's stuff. And I think sometimes as Christians, we allow ourselves to get taken advantage of because we want to like help everything. But I think sometimes it's like, I don't have the time to do that because I also have to be home. I have to do all these other things. I can't work late all the time to pick up everyone else's slack.
Okay, and you're bringing it down to the nuts and bolts of an example within an office, which I can bring right into a church.
Right.
The same scenarios are there, and the bottom line is, you can only do what you're capable of doing. If a brother here volunteers, it's the same guy who volunteers. Let's say the same guy. Not the case here, but if the same guy volunteers for the Wednesday night Bible class all the time, it's just the same guy. Is he doing somebody else's job? No, he's doing what he's capable of doing. Okay, that's all. That doesn't prevent somebody else from volunteering, but my point is, yes, you can only do what you are capable of doing. It can be more, and that does happen in the office situation too. There's no question that you can, if others are not doing more, I've heard a lot of stories. But yeah, it's got to get done. Now, what we've forgotten to talk about here, I kind of got a little sidetracked, was I wanted to cover the last part of verse 9, where it talks about masters and your responsibilities, giving up the threatenings you talked about, knowing that your own master also is in heaven, and there's no partiality with him. And that's the thing. Oh, Nancy, you want to say something?
Well, the one thing is when we do our jobs and we do it the right way, we want to make sure. But we also don't want to be enablers by doing other people's jobs. We want them to be able to do that themselves also at our workplace.
Right. And I understand how that can happen. You can kind of be an enabler, but the point is, I just happen to know that from a Christian standpoint, you honestly can't do somebody else's job. You can only do your own job. You can only do your own work. And that's what expected. You can bring that into the family situation, I guess. We could talk about that and responsibilities. There is that danger. Because we've been talking about husbands' roles. Tonight I'm talking about the wife's role. When somebody doesn't step it up, you can't do the boss's job. The boss is supposed to do his job. And back to Mallory's analogy again, you can only do what you're responsible for. And your boss will know that. The boss, he says be obedient. So the point is do your job. I could be all wet on this and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. But would you actually be rebuked for doing your job and not covering for Bill? Is that possible? I have a hard time with that. I mean, I guess it might happen, but if a boss came up to me and said, well, Bill's not a worker. I wanted you to pick up the slack with, maybe that happens. I don't know. It just seems really hard for me to imagine that you would be punished for doing your job and doing it heartily, right? Maybe you could probably come up with a scenario that does fit that. I guess I was just trying to say that really, for the most part, a boss is going to be pleased if you just do your job. If you just do it heartily, not with eye service, not as a man pleaser, but you go in, if you're working 8 hours, you give 8 hours of good, honest work. And I don't know too many bosses will be upset with that. And if Harry's not doing his part and the boss comes in, hey, I expect you to cover for Harry too. Really? And I don't know, they might think that, but I don't know if anybody would actually come up and say that. If you've ever experienced that, then you let me know about that, but that's.
Well, they just ask where your initiative is.
Really? Okay. All right. Warren?
It's happening.
Is it?
Yeah, but it's circumstances. It's not something that happens every day.
Right.
It's in the world that I lived in for a while, there were people you have out of different areas of crews that weren't familiar with equipment, so you were put into a situation that
Okay.
you had to be kind of the lead guy or whatever. If you can't, you're not the boss. And it depends on who you got to work with. So yeah, there's been occasions
Okay.
somebody not necessarily gets rebuked, they get questioned.
Okay.
Why did we not
I understand.
I don't know of anybody that suffered from that.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
I'm saying, yeah, it depends on circumstances.
And and I can see that, and again, I guess I would come back to this idea that if you want to know the Christian answer to that, if somebody were to come up to us and say, Chuck, what does Jesus want me to do? What does this passage teach about my responsibilities when I did my job? And I did the best that I could, and then the boss expected me to pick up Harry's slack, and I couldn't get it done, and he rebuked me for it. You know, that's rare, but I'll just tell you this much from a Christian standpoint. Number one, you can quit. Number two, you take it and you just go on and you do the best you can. It's like criticism, like Warren talked about, a criticism. Can you guys handle a criticism? That's tough, isn't it? Especially when you've worked hard on something and somebody finds some flaw. I mean, it's almost like when Debbie does this full Thanksgiving dinner and everything's on the table and I go, where's the... After all that work and I spot one thing that's not on the table. You know, it's like, thanks. But seriously, I mean, in a job situation, I think there are times that we have to be mindful of who's our boss. Say, well, yeah, okay. In the physical realm, I work for this CEO. But ultimately, I'm just serving the Lord and I'm working for him. And he knows I might get criticism from somebody that I didn't do my job, but you want to know something? There's peace of knowing God knows I did my job. Right? Isn't that the point? I mean, you're going to have people that it doesn't matter what you do, you can't please them. But as long as you're serving like you're serving the Lord, you can find contentment with that and have that peace of knowing, look, say what you got to say. Are you firing me? Nope. Okay. See you tomorrow. You know, you can criticize, but I did my job. And sometimes it doesn't please everybody. Warren? Was that it? Okay. All right. Well, we got this next section, guys. Putting on the whole armor of God. It's going to be a good class. I really wanted to teach it, but it's a juicy class for somebody volunteer to teach it next Sunday morning. And so whoever wants to teach on the whole armor of God, by all means, let me know, and we'll pencil you in for next Sunday morning. Thank you for your comments. Done.